earnings. Our top story now. India faces a 50% tariff on most of its exports to the US after the additional 25% penalty came into effect yesterday. More than 60% of India's exports to the US now face a 50% tariff. Only India and Brazil have been hit with the highest tariff rate of 50%. President Trump, while announcing the penalty levy earlier this month, had accused India of fueling Moscow's war machine by buying Russian oil. However, United States has not penalized China, whose Russian oil imports exceed that of India. The White House has ramped up its rhetoric in the last 24 hours. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, in an interview to Fox News, accused New Delhi of tapping the US along on trade deal negotiations. Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, said that India can get rid of the additional 25% levy if it stops buying Russian oil. Navarro termed Indian negotiators arrogant and dubbed Russia's Ukraine invasion as Modi's war. Meanwhile, economic advisor Kevin Hassett called the relationship between India and the US a complicated one. He also added that if India does not budge on trade, he doesn't think the president will either. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that India is experiencing the cost of supporting Putin, and others, like China and Brazil, may as well do soon. India has stood its ground. Government sources say US must set aside 25% additional tariffs before any trade deal can be concluded. The sixth round of negotiations have been postponed, but sources say efforts are on to schedule it soon. The Finance Ministry has said that while the immediate impact of the US tariffs is limited, secondary effects cannot be ruled out. The ministry added that these tariffs will affect the Indian industry unless the trade uncertainty is resolved. I caught up with Atul Keshav, president of the US-India Business Council, and began by asking him about the possibility of a pause on the additional tariffs on India.
Look, my sense of this is that there's always an opportunity for discussion. You know, great powers have needs and interests with one another, and they should talk to one another. So if we can divorce emotion and passion from the discussion, if we can talk to one another about what our needs are, what our potential differences of opinion are, then I do think there can always be an outcome. You know, between the great powers, there are discussions about off-ramps, about glide scopes for various pathways of activity. Things don't have to turn on a dime. Indeed, two vast countries like the United States and India cannot turn on a dime, but we can have constructive discussions about glide paths toward better outcomes that are good for both of us. And indeed, we do have an excellent and multifaceted relationship, and that should be preserved.
So if we were to delve a little deeper, what can both sides do in order to get out of this situation, put the relationship back on track?
So for India, I think, first of all, India is a very proud country. It's a sovereign nation. It's a vast democracy. It is a growing power, the fourth largest economy on earth. For India, though, this is a bit of a tough moment because something like 60 billion of India's 87 billion in goods exports to America will be affected by a 50% tariff. And these are in labor-intensive industries like jewelry and seafood and shoe wear and other things. And so it will put, you know, a much higher price on those items, and it will therefore reduce India's competitiveness. Meanwhile, there are other countries that have arranged trade deals with the United States, like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, many others, that will try to take advantage because they'll have more preferential access to the vast American market. And it is a $30 trillion market. So for India, I think, you know, the prime minister has been very clear that there needs to be greater efficiency in the system. He espoused some very ambitious goals at Red Fort on his Independence Day speech. He's also gathered his bureaucrats to talk about ways to innovate across the Indian system to reduce friction for businesses and investors, to reduce regulation and red tape, to improve the tax treatment for investors. And these are all laudatory and commendable and will help draw the eye of investors, Indian, American, global, to see what can be done in India, given India's remarkable growth story. And India has also invested very heavily in improving its infrastructure, ports, airports, roadways, speed of doing business, trade facilitation. These are also important. But I think it reveals that India still has some efficiencies to capture and that very important and disciplined work is needed to do to help those affected industries to become even more efficient and competitive, given the rather steep slope they now have to climb. For the United
Right.
States, I think there's a desire to sort of see India kind of help lend its effort to some of the large geographic and global problems that the United States faces. Ukraine, first of the list. I think the president is very sincere when he says he wants to end the war in Ukraine. If India can offer help in some meaningful way toward ending that war, I think it will very greatly improve the current situation with the United States.
Right, that's an important point. And that brings me to my next question. Currently, President Trump seems to be using India as leverage in talks with Putin. Uh, what if this doesn't really impact Putin's decision making vis-a-vis the war or any possible ceasefire that the US is trying to bring about? Do you expect that there could be now, after secondary tariffs, secondary sanctions against Indian entities? And that could be a big blow to the relationship. What about a crackdown on H-1B visas, for example? Do you feel that as a next step, US could increase the pressure in India?
Well, Parikshit Ji, to be very honest, anything is possible. And I think every lever and instrument may be on the table. And this is where we sort of have to step back, be a bit dispassionate, think about how we got to where we are, and think about how we can walk back toward what we used to be back in February when that rather wonderful joint statement came out between the president and the prime minister in the Oval Office in Washington. Look, my dad always told me that you get an A for effort, and it doesn't matter what the outcome is as long as you put in full effort. And if you look at how the U.S. is handling world affairs right now, it is engaged very extensively with the Russians, of all people, right now, to try to end this war. Now, you can think whatever you want about the Russians, but the fact is there's a lot of talking going on. There are Chinese negotiation teams heavily engaged with the United States right now on addressing some of our concerns vis-a-vis trade with China. We're engaging with the Europeans. We have differences of opinions with our friends, but yet we talk. Canada, Mexico, etc. I think that at the leader level, there needs to be more conversation in order to get us back to where we used to be. There needs to be some, some discussion about, as I said, glide paths for ways to get back to the collaboration that has benefited both of us. And so I would hope that these other instruments that you mentioned will not come into play. But a part of that is that every country sort of have a good and clear line of communication, and that we talk about each other's needs, and we start to see how we can work toward addressing each other's needs as friends do. And so there may be things India needs from us that we need from them that we should talk through and see how we can come to a mutual accommodation, as we have done many times in the past. So for a diplomat, the answer is always to talk, but then the talking should be private. It should be respectful of each other. It should be the talking that friends do in private to work through an issue. And I would hope that that can happen so that we don't see some of these other instruments come to play. And indeed, you're seeing some indication of it in some of the statements coming out of Washington. And personally, as an advocate of the relationship, I would rather the U.S.-India get back on a path of continued engagement and partnership across the many, many realms of our multifaceted relationship.
Right. My final question to you would be, there are sectors which are exempted from reciprocal and additional tariffs right now, like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, iPhones, mobile phones for that matter, iPads. Do you see investments in these sectors from US to India getting impacted? What is the question, the number one question that US businesses who were looking at India as a manufacturing destination asking you right now?
So that's a very important question, Parikshit Ji. And I really do commend and laud the Indian government and the Prime Minister for undertaking a program of hopefully will be sweeping reforms to help reduce friction within the Indian ecosystem for investors vis-a-vis other countries that have done a lot of homework as well. So if that continues, that will, of course, draw the eye of investors. But there's also a psychological element. You know, there's the old adage that trade follows the flag. Well, it may not necessarily always be true. Businesses are independent in our great free and open societies. They make their own decisions based on shareholder value and the decisions of the investment committee. But business also looks at the psychological intangibles of what's going on. And when there is friction between the United States and India, they will have to consider that. There is uncertainty right now because of the absence of a trade agreement between the United States and India. The U.S. has stitched up trade deals with all kinds of countries in the last 6 months, but we haven't done that with India. So if you're an investment committee anywhere, whether you're an Indian company investing in America, as many have done substantially, or an American company looking at India, you're going to wonder what that uncertainty might do to a 10 or $20 billion investment decision if all of a sudden the policy parameters stated by the governments change. And so there's a lot of risk right now. Uncertainty is not good for planning. It is a tax on planning. And therefore, I really urge the governments to sort of put this genie back in the bottle, get back to talking, figure out how we can be mutually relevant to each other, how we can advance each other's needs, because that's what friends do, and get business to the point where it feels truly confident to invest in these crucial areas where if the free countries of the world don't innovate, then the adversaries will at our expense.
All right, so that was Atul Keshav of USIBC saying it's time for leader-level conversations to resolve these trade tensions because uncertainty is not good for businesses. It's time for a quick break, but